Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Sky News has learnt that European governments are advising firms to avoid British components ahead of Brexit. Our political editor has seen official Dutch government advice to exporters, telling them that if they use too many British parts, they may lose free trade access. Meanwhile, in more bad news for UK car makers, it seems British cars will not qualify for any free trade deals post-Brexit because they don't use enough domestic parts. And that Downing Street was aware of this. Well, here with the latest of our series of Brexit forensics is our report from our political editor, Faisal Islam.
It is the car industry's big summer day out at a test track near Bedford. Big engines, petrol, hybrids, electric, most of these, they were imports, but they still rely on British parts flying across the channel. But now, because of Brexit, European governments are telling their businesses to avoid UK parts. The official Dutch government advice seen by Sky News warns businesses trade with the United Kingdom will become more difficult after Brexit. This may affect your company, but also your suppliers or customers. Consider looking for alternatives within the EU when the product or service is essential for your own business operations. And after Brexit, the United Kingdom is no longer part of the EU, so parts from the United Kingdom no longer count towards this minimum production in the EU. Keep in mind any consequences concerning the reduction of orders. This is all about the parts that make up cars and planes. It's about rules of origin, vital for cross-border manufacturing. In order to qualify as an EU export, 55% of the total value needs to come from the EU. What the Dutch advise is that UK parts do not count.
I think what the Dutch government is saying to their businesses makes perfect sense from a trade point of view. There is a risk that they don't know what will happen with the UK and EU relationship in March 2019. Be ready, and that may involve sourcing your parts for your finished products from inside the EU rather than a country that's leaving.
And it's not just the Dutch. From here at Rotterdam Port, the European Commission itself has just put out a notice to EU factories making a similar warning about UK parts. But the rules of origin issue is a two-way problem for post-Brexit Britain about what will and will not qualify as a UK export under the much-heralded post-Brexit free trade deals promised by this government.
Rules of origin are the small print of free trade deals with big implications that kick in if we're no longer part of a customs union with the EU. For example, for cars being exported from Tilbury docks. The government has previously argued that we are very close to meeting the sorts of thresholds that will enable a British car to be a British car under a free trade deal. But Sky News understands that the industry has told Number 10 directly that we are, in fact, miles off.
Car industry chief Mike Halls confirmed that to Sky News.
The actual figure is more like 25%. If the target is 65%, it shows the difference, the distance we would have to go.
But the government's been going around thinking it's more like 44–45%.
No. The UK automotive industry, on average, buys about 44% of its products from a UK supplier. But that's not what rules of origin is. You have to look at something called originating content. What proportion of the content actually comes from the UK in our instance? That is more like 20 to 25%.
So as far as cars go, on average, they won't even qualify for the free trade deals that the government is anxious to sign by leaving the customs union. Sky News put this to the Trade Secretary.
Could it possibly be that cars made in the UK might not qualify for some of the free trade deals you hope to be signing?
Well, in any trade agreement, rules of origin, as they're called, is always an important element. You can't prejudge any one trade agreement, but we would want to ensure that anything that we signed up to was able to maximise the UK sale of goods. Why would you sign up to something that wasn't actually going to give you a trading advantage?
But this former Trade Department insider said that warnings were made to the very top of government.
We knew there would be a steep learning curve for ministers, the Prime Minister, in issues of trade. I think I've been more surprised by the lack of engagement with business. That meant that these messages didn't come through clearly and quickly enough, that essentially they wanted from business really to just talk about the opportunities. They didn't want to hear about the possible threats that would come with Brexit. They didn't want to hear about the whole picture.
I mean, there you're talking about Downing Street, you're talking about number 10, you're talking about the Prime Minister.
I think so, yes.
All this comes at an already delicate time in the car industry. Privately aghast at the chances of attracting big battery factories in the UK that need to be able to be used by continental manufacturers of new cars.
The industry, the government want the car industry to go fully electric over the next few decades. That requires tens of billions of pounds of investment. Investment that may be lacking because of Brexit uncertainty. And the government at the very top seems to barely understand.
So right now, these rules of origin mean that Europeans can shun UK parts, and for now, British cars won't even qualify as British for free trade deals. Just like a car, Brexit is all in the detail. Faisal Islam, Sky News.
Well, joining me now are Sam Lowe. He's a research fellow at the Centre for European Reform, specialising in international trade, and also here to discuss, amongst other things, Jeremy Corbyn's latest post-Brexit trade policy. We're joined by the Labour MP and former Shadow Chancellor, Chris Leslie. Welcome to you both. I mean, Sam, has Faisal Islam got this right? Because he appears to be saying after Brexit, the British car industry is going to be into pretty severe trouble.
I think it's going to struggle because there's two questions. Will it be able to qualify for the preferential tariffs afforded by a free trade agreement with the EU itself? So even if we do get a good deal with the EU, will we still be able to sell into the EU under zero tariffs? And will we be able to qualify for all of these new free trade agreements we're going to have? The standard threshold that needs to be cleared for local content is around 55%. And as we heard in the segment before, you know, talks of us, the UK content being about 42%, as to the value of the cars we sell, that's maybe a bit too high. It's closer to 20.
I mean, Japanese car manufacturers have said they're going to carry on making new models in this country. So is this more Project Fear?
I don't think so. We have to think about investment cycles as well, and I think there's a hope that the transition sticks. So if we do have until December 2020, we'll still be able to service the EU market from the UK quite comfortably. The big fear in relation to the transition is whether the UK inputs or the UK cars will still qualify for the existing EU trade agreements during the transition. And as to that, we don't yet know, because the Commission, whilst saying it will notify these third countries that they should continue to treat UK imports as being from the EU for the purpose of these agreements, won't do so until the withdrawal agreement is signed.
You mentioned the transition because we did put this, of course, to the Department for Exiting the European Union. They told us that no minister was available to discuss Faisal's Brexit forensics, but they did say that during the implementation period, the United Kingdom is to be treated as a member state for the purposes of these agreements. Is that true?
It's almost true. What it actually says in the footnote on page 77 of the agreement is that the EU will notify these third countries that they are to continue to treat the UK as a member state for the purpose of these agreements. It still requires the third country consent, and it actually requires us to have signed the withdrawal agreement, which hasn't happened yet.
So, Chris Leslie, what do you think we need to protect the car industry?
We need to stay in the single market and the customs union as a very minimum. I personally think that the public should be given a chance to look at the deal that comes up. If this deal ends up with our car industry potentially not being able to trade or get parts put in, as this story has, then the public have a right to make a judgment on it. It was, certainly, the judgment in 2016 on the principle of Brexit was there, but we have to, I think, now give the public a say when all of these factors are revealed.
A second vote, the people's vote.
Yeah, and dare I say it, questions of rules of origin and all of these technical issues, Sky News is doing a fantastic job on the forensic revealing these weren't part of that debate then. People weren't aware of it when they voted.
Now, what about Labour's stance this morning? Because you've got proposals being put forward by your front bench next week, And Keir Starmer is saying, look, we're looking at elements of the Norway solution, yet you've said that this is some kind of betrayal. What do you
Well, because the House of Lords, the way this legislation is going, will be sending back an amendment to the Commons, very simply saying, we believe the European Economic Area single market should be the negotiating objective of the British government. That's actually in the bill. So we have a very simple decision as MPs. Do we agree with the House of Lords and allow it to stay in the bill, or do we take it out? Apparently, Labour's front bench are thinking about abstaining on that question. I just think, you know, we've been hearing of all the industrial implications for jobs, for austerity potentially, if our economy starts to go downhill. And I want to support that EEA option. We have the chance of winning because we know that there are at least a dozen Conservative MPs, possibly more, who will vote for that EEA. We have that opportunity in our grasp.
What about the proposal that Labour has put down, its own amendment?
Well, it's all very, very interesting, but of course, the Conservative rebels won't vote for anything with Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Keir Starmer's name on it for obvious reasons. There's a political reality here. If we want to shape the future of this country and stay in that EEA single market, we have to work cross-party in that way. The Conservative MPs are willing to vote for it. Is Labour really going to take responsibility and step back and abstain?
Do you think that debate is still live within your party?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
You're not terribly popular with the leadership. I mean, do you think they might actually change their position?
I hope so, because it's not just me, the trade union movement, lots of people, even in the momentum side of the Labour Party elsewhere, saying Labour has to stand up for jobs and prevent austerity in the future. If we have this hard Brexit arrangement, and we end up with our economy retrenching, we're not going to have the money for the schools and the hospitals and the council services, all those other things.
Now, why wouldn't Labour do this?
Well, I still hope that they will. I think there are some people saying, oh, they don't like freedom of movement arrangements. Actually, the EEA gives the ability for a brake to be put in on and some flexibility on labour movement issues. So it is still Brexit, EEA. Yeah. And, you know, personally, I think that is not that great. Yeah. But in terms of trying to salvage the best as possible, this is where Labour has to now confront it.
What about the argument, which we're also hearing from Keir Starmer, that, look, now is not the moment, that there's going to be a showdown at the end of the deal process? That's the moment to decide.
Yeah, but this is the golden, historic moment to shape the negotiating objectives of the British government. And frankly, if the Labour Party sort of steps back from this issue, drops the ball, misses the opportunity to win in Parliament because we've got these Conservative MPs, then I'm afraid Labour will share a big part of the responsibility for the hard Brexit and the austerity to come.
Do you think he's right that staying in effectively the European Economic Area is the only way to keep trade at the level which it is at the moment?
Well, I think it's important to say that the EEA is probably the most comprehensive off-the-shelf option, but it's still actually not enough. It doesn't deal with VAT, for example, which is something else Sky's been focusing on recently. It doesn't deal with the customs union issues, so it doesn't actually deal with the rules of origin issues that we've been discussing today, and it wouldn't necessarily resolve the issue with the third countries. But in terms of, if you're talking about what off-the-shelf model would do the least harm, then you probably start with EEA and build.
And we're going to be talking about growth in a moment. What are the growth prospects for the UK?
Well, we're obviously, the OECD came out with their data recently that showed Britain was the lowest growing country. We're going into a very difficult trade cycle internationally with steel tariffs and all those other things. You know, we can't afford to sacrifice the frictionless trading arrangements with our nearest partners, because that supports a whole series, not just manufacturing, by the way, service sector where we have a surplus. I just think it's sort of economic self-harm for us to be sort of stepping back and saying, oh, this is all too complicated, let's just sort of get on with it. The consequences are potentially severe.
OK, thank you both very much indeed. Well, let's turn to the world economy. And a major escalation of tensions between the US and its trading partners could have at least as much of an impact on global trade as the financial crisis of a decade ago. That is according to the World Bank's report on global economic prospects, which were published overnight. The report also warned the harshest impact would be seen by developing nations. Well, Francisca Oensorge is the lead author of that report, and she joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So overall, although there's a little bit of global growth, it's a pretty gloomy prospect. Would that be a fair summary?
Yes, in the last year, a rising tide of investment, trade confidence has lifted growth in the majority of countries. This tide is now turning. So we still expect robust growth of 3.1% in 2018, but after that we expect it to slow. And even around this moderate slowdown, there's sizable, significant downside risks.
And why is it slowing down? What's going wrong? Is it because of growing trade protectionism?
Protectionism to us, escalating protectionism is to us still a risk. The reason we expect growth to slow is simply that current growth is above potential, it's above the long-term sustainable rate. Monetary policy support by the major central banks will very gradually be withdrawn, and that will naturally then slow growth. Protectionism is a major risk to global growth.
I mean, I was looking at the regional comparisons, and it's pretty clear from that, for example, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is going to fall well behind, that although China's going to slow, it's still going to be way ahead of the rate of growth, for example, in Europe and indeed the United States. So those kind of global disparities that we're aware of are simply going to increase under your forecast.
Yes, clearly, I mean, China is undergoing a very well-managed gradual slowdown towards more sustainable growth. What we worry about
still growth above 6%.
Is 6.3% next year, yeah. But what we worry about is sub-Saharan Africa. Even a growth rate of 3% really means barely growing per capita incomes. So this year there's essentially stagnation in per capita incomes. By the end of the forecast horizon 2020, we have barely 1% per capita growth. That doesn't lift a lot of people out of poverty.
So what would be the ways to try and iron out that unfairness, if you like, or failure of competitive performance?
Well, Africa faces a lot of headwinds. A lot of these countries, actually 2/3 of emerging markets and developing economies are commodity exporters. Even if commodity prices are now recovering a bit, over the medium term, over 10 years, we see commodity demand growth clearly slowing. That's one challenge. Another challenge is just that institutional environments are often not conducive to investment. So major investment push from the private sector would require also institutional reform.
I mean, Donald Trump would simply say, look, there are unfairnesses in the world, that Germany is running a trade surplus, that China is also trading unfairly, and that he wants to address those. And a lot of people in Europe and America might agree with him.
That is exactly the risk. That's the risk that there is this tit-for-tat of trade measures. And if it affects the three largest economies of the world, the US, China, and the euro area, it affects 62% of emerging or of countries in the world for which one of these three economies is the single largest export destination.
But you know, if you're Italy or indeed Greece, you might feel that euro policies dominated by Germany are actually damaging your economy and damaging your prospects, mightn't you?
Yeah, for the euro area as a whole, there are political risks, there are clear political risks around to the growth prospects in the euro area. And again, that is something that will be felt by all its trading partners in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East and North Africa, even in Latin America, our main client countries.
Now, I know you don't single out the UK in your analysis. Nonetheless, you heard our conversation there. Also, you've heard what the OECD is saying, and the assumption that probably we are going to be in the bottom half of performances within the European Union. I mean, that would be fair, wouldn't it?
In general, advanced economies grow more slowly than the countries where there's clear catch-up potential.
You know, with France or Germany or wherever.
Yeah, we have our forecast, growth forecast for the UK is broadly in line with the government's. And yes, but we expect a strengthening over the forecast horizon over the next couple of years.
And do you see a Brexit impact there, either positive or negative?
Not in our baseline. In our baseline forecast, the Brexit process is very well advertised. It's very well announced in advance. What we worry about is that there are surprises.
We're talking about the uncertainties there, though,
yes,
weren't we?
Exactly. And even the uncertainty alone can really set back investment. We have estimated econometrically that a 10% increase in measured uncertainty in the euro area can reduce investment in Eastern Europe by 0.6 percentage points within a year. So even just the uncertainty and the noise around policy reforms or policy changes can set back investment.
But you seem to be saying that Brexit comparatively is being relatively well managed in terms of surprises.
At the moment, it's all discussed well in advance, it's all very open, but of course, throughout the process, there's a possibility of surprises. Bad surprises.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you too.